Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Sirish Pachwa, Worldwide Specialist for Cloud Compliance and Assurance Solutions. Today, we're going to talk about AWS Audit Manager. It's a new service launched in December 2020. It enables continuous assessment of controls and automated evidence collection. We have a very exciting session lined up for you today. In the next 30 minutes, we'll cover these four topics. First, we'll cover the cloud-related compliance and audit challenges. Second, we'll highlight common themes and use cases. Third, we will have a demo to showcase how Audit Manager can help you in your cloud journey. And finally, we'll close it out by providing some tips on getting started on Audit Manager. We have spoken to hundreds of customers, including many of you. Here are 6 cloud compliance and audit challenges. First, dynamic landscape, both in terms of new regulations as well as cloud technology. The challenge here is to extend and evolve your current compliance and controls practices for the cloud, both in terms of scale as well as the speed of change in the cloud. The volume and variety of structured as well as unstructured data is exponentially growing in the cloud, and this poses a challenge to collect data and evidence effectively to meet audit requirements. Compliance and audit teams are being asked to do more with less. The manual nature of audit impacts the productivity and efficiency of these teams. Global, regional, and local flavor of regulations result in complex overlapping set of controls and requirements that result in duplication of effort for evidence and data collection. And finally, compliance, risk, audit, security, they're all tightly interconnected, and yet each of them have specific needs that often leads to information silos across teams with similar set of evidence being collected multiple times. Some of the compliance audit teams are new to cloud and do have a steep learning curve. The challenge here is to interpret and map the controls to the cloud. Last year, we did a survey for enterprise customers. These are the 3 common themes. First, more than 80% had no automated processes for compliance and collecting evidence on an ongoing basis. Cloud audits are still being done the old-fashioned way. Imagine sitting down with internal auditors in a room, taking screenshots and writing custom code to collect log data. The second theme was about 60% of the time being spent on collecting evidence. During audit season or compliance reporting, it's all hands on the deck. What it means is you're pulling away your best resources from their critical day job to help out in collecting evidence. Third, recognition and desire to enhance cloud compliance and audit capabilities in a cloud-native way. Leaders in compliance audit want their teams to acquire skills, capabilities, and tools to provide both effective challenge as well as support strategic cloud initiatives. So how are leading enterprises approaching these themes and challenges? How is AWS helping solve for these problems? We've identified 3 common use cases. At the end of the day, compliance and audit are about managing the risk. We have aligned the use case to the risk management pillars: manage risk, oversee risk, and independent assurance of risk and controls. I'll speak to this in the next few slides as well. The first use case, automate compliance management and manage risk. The focus here is on reducing the undifferentiated heavy lifting for a manual effort. Automation can make it easier for the frontline functions to easily satisfy compliance and audit requirements. Second use case, how to implement continuous oversight and oversee risk. The current mode of in-point-in-time snapshot needs to be enhanced to a more continuous compliance and monitoring capability. Third, how to assess and independently gather evidence for assurance of risk. It is no longer enough to certify compliance. One has to demonstrate compliance via supporting evidence. How can AWS help regarding these 3 use cases? AWS offers a wide range of capabilities and services that can help you implement solutions. Some of these services being CloudTrail, Config, Control Tower, Security Hub, Audit Manager, Macie, etc. Some of the related questions that do arise: how do these services integrate with each other? What is the best way to map these services to the three use cases that we spoke about? And how do you build and implement a continuous compliance and audit solution using these services? Mapping AWS capabilities. The three use cases that we spoke about do need to fit in within your existing risk compliance and audit structure. Many of our customers follow the Institute of Internal Audit three lines of defense model. The first line of defense being the frontline business units, where the controls are implemented to manage risk. The second line of defense being the functions such as risk and compliance that are overseeing the risk. And finally, the third line of defense being the audit functions. We have mapped our specific AWS services to the three use cases as well as the three lines of defense model as a quick reference. For the first use case of compliance automation, services listed in the first pillar provide compliance automation capabilities, examples being Config, CloudTrail, etc., which allow the first line of defense roles such as frontline business units implement compliance automation. For the second use case of continuous compliance, oversight, and oversee risk, the services in the second pillar such as Security Hub and CloudWatch provide continuous compliance monitoring capabilities to help the second line of defense. And for the third use case of independent assessment, evidence collection, our new service, AWS Audit Manager, provides the automated evidence capability for the auditors, both internal as well as external. For the remaining part of this session, let's focus on the third use case, which is solving for the problem of automating assessments and evidence collection that takes away 60% of the time in the life cycle. How does Audit Manager offer an integrated solution? The current manual steps that can be automated are the manual mapping of controls to AWS usage, the practice of capturing screenshots for each resource as evidence, develop custom code tools to gather evidence that simply do not scale for increasing scope as well as for ad hoc requests. How does Audit Manager benefit your journey? Audit Manager continuously audits your AWS usage, offers a library of 14 pre-built assessment frameworks out of the box. For each of these frameworks, controls are already mapped to the AWS service and the usage. Saves you time with automated evidence collection, so you can focus on review of the evidence. Evidence is continuously collected and organized so you're audit ready at any point in time. Enables collaboration across different teams by allowing delegation of evidence review and assessments. And finally, helps you generate auditor-ready evidence reports that have been continuously collected and secured and securely stored. Integrity of evidence is enforced via checksum. Here's a list of the 14 pre-built assessment frameworks offered within Audit Manager. The list includes common industry frameworks and standards. Some examples: CIS Foundation's Benchmark, PCI DSS, HITRUST, FedRAMP Moderate, and SOC 2. Frameworks such as AWS Operational Best Practices also maps to the Security Hub Foundational Security Best Practices guidance. The Audit Manager sample framework helps you explore and test Audit Manager easily and quickly. Data sources for Audit Manager. There are 4 data sources for automated data collection. The 2 foundational data sources are user activity logs from CloudTrail and configuration snapshots from AWS API calls. Security Hub and Config can be turned on to provide evidence of the Security Hub findings as well as compliance checks from config rules within Config. For controls that are manual in nature, you can upload these manual controls and manual evidence as well as compensating controls. For example, your annual policy review, updated standard operating procedures, and evidence of remediation action. In terms of partners, we continue to collaborate with a wide range of partners to build and offer solutions to our customers. Here are a few examples of our partnerships. All right, Let's jump into the Audit Manager demo. Take it away, Kajal.
Hi, I'm Kajal Deepak, and I lead the AWS Audit Manager service team. I will walk you through the service today and show you some of the key functionality in this demonstration.
To get started with Audit Manager, you will come to the service homepage. The service homepage gives you a summary of the service, telling you a little bit about the benefits and how the service works, as well as providing you critical information like pricing and resources to get you to documentation, information on the API details, as well as frequently asked questions. If you are setting up Audit Manager for the first time in the region, you will have to go through a setup flow in which you will provide some critical parameters. You will set permissions for IAM roles that you want to be able to provide access to service to. You will also choose your encryption settings by either customizing an encryption key or using the provided encryption key. If you are using an organization account, you might want to set up a dedicated admin account for Audit Manager to use so that you do not have to use your management account. Please note that if the organization is operating in multiple regions, then you will have to set up a dedicated admin for each region since Audit Manager is a regional service. If you are using Security Hub and Config, Audit Manager can surface compliance check data from these services, and you should enable them in the Audit Manager console. Once the setup is complete, you can go back and run the service. For the sake of our demo, I'm going to show what the service looks like if it is already set up. If the service is already set up, you can go ahead and launch, and you will land on the assessments page, where you can see all of the assessments which are already running. An assessment is a process of collecting data from the mapped data sources to the controls you have specified. An assessment is launched from a framework. A framework is a set of these controls, which can either be pre-built. So Audit Manager does come with a library of pre-built frameworks for some of the most commonly used regulatory standards, or you can create your own custom framework where you might want to use controls from our existing controls library or build your own custom controls. And we will get into more detail of that later in the demo. Let me first show you how to create an assessment. To create an assessment, you simply have to provide some of the basic parameters, including where you want the assessment reports or evidence reports to be stored. So you choose an S3 bucket for that. And then you can go ahead and select a framework that you want to use to launch this assessment. We will go ahead and select from one of the existing pre-built frameworks in the library. There is an option to create tags to make assessments easy to track and search. In case you have an expanding library of these and you want to be able to track by, say, department or quarter or any other dimension. Once these parameters are defined, you can select which accounts you want this assessment to run on. I'll go ahead and select a couple of accounts to include. After that, you must tell Audit Manager what services you want to include in the scope. And depending on the framework that you want to run or the controls you want to assess, this might be a very specific subset. So you have a choice to select them. Or you can just select all of the services if that's simpler, which is kind of what I'm going to do here for the sake of the demo again. Once that step is complete, the next step is specifying who are the owners of this assessment. The audit owners are able to make changes to the assessment and conduct operations like stop the assessment, for example. So these are users which have been onboarded via the IAM permissions, which were set up earlier. We'll go ahead and select a couple of audit owners to share this assessment with. Once all of these parameters have been provided, you can go ahead and create the assessment. And at that point, Audit Manager will use this assessment to start collecting the data, but the data will not populate for the first 24 hours, since Audit Manager will take some time and follow the cadence that is set up for data collection. This cadence is daily for CloudTrail, where any of the user activity is aggregated into a daily evidence folder. And for Security Hub and config compliance checks, it depends on the settings on those services. Audit Manager also collects data through API calls to services, for example, EC2. And the frequency of these API calls can be set through the console here to be either daily, weekly, or monthly. Since this is a freshly created assessment and we won't have much data here at the moment, I'll go back to the assessments page and continue the demo with an existing assessment so we can dive into it and see what an assessment produces. So here is another example of an assessment which was created using the same framework. When you look at the assessment summary page, it starts off with all of the demographics of the assessment. It's similar to the workflow we just went through in creating an assessment. And it tells you the number of AWS accounts in scope, the services which are included, and the number of audit owners, besides giving you the information on where are the assessment reports stored and the creation and the update date. When you scroll down, you see multiple tabs. And we'll go through this one by one. So let's first dive into the controls, which are included in this assessment. These controls come from the framework that we had used for PCI. As you can see, controls are grouped by control sets. Within each control set, you are able to see the detailed controls. And you can see what is the automated evidence which has been collected against each one. So let's go ahead and look at what is inside a control. On the control page, you see all of the details of the control. You see the name and the description, as well as the testing information, which summarizes what is the data that Audit Manager is pulling to satisfy this control. If this was a custom control, there might be an action plan or a remediation plan that the user might define. Inside that control, you will be able to see the evidence folders, which are daily. As noted earlier, the data is being accumulated and aggregated on a daily basis. Any compliance checks which are pulled from either Security Hub or config are being surfaced. So let's look inside an evidence folder. Again, there is a summary of demographic data on what this evidence folder is related to and which control is it related to. And then the actual evidence data points. Let's take a look at evidence. So this is the evidence detail. And what you're able to see here is what is the control that this evidence has been pulled against, the source of the evidence, and the exact event name, as well as information on the account, the associated user activity, as well as the attributes it generates, or any resource information that might be included. This is the same information that can also be downloaded as an evidence or an assessment report in a PDF format. So let's go back to the evidence folder. One of the things you can do is you can also upload manual evidence. So if for this day there's a certain manual evidence that needs to be uploaded against this control, there's an option to do that. Now let's say I want to add an evidence to assessment report. I can go ahead and do that from here so that this particular piece of evidence is available to me to share via an assessment report later on. I can also go to this control and do this addition at an evidence folder level. So instead of selecting a particular piece of evidence, I can also select an entire evidence folder and I can add it to my assessment report. And we will see how that assessment report looks in a moment here. Note that under this detailed control page, you're also able to see the exact data sources which are being used. So there is a summary description in the testing information that we saw earlier, but the exact data sources which are being used are also spelled out here. And this is what is mapping to the evidence that we just saw that is being generated. Control sets can be assigned for review by subject matter experts through a delegation workflow, and there are comments which can be added, as well as there's going to be a change log that will track any changes that are happening to this control. So these are the 4 tabs which you will be able to dive into from the control detail page, which will summarize all of the evidence collected in evidence folders, summarize the data sources, and summarize any comments or exchanges, as well as a log of any changes which are happening to this control. Now let's circle back to our assessment. We did a deep dive into controls to see the details of the control and the evidence. Now let's take a look at the evidence report. We just added some evidence that we would like to use in an assessment report. So let's go ahead and use this evidence to generate an assessment or an evidence report here. I'm going to specify some details. And go ahead and generate this. And again, please note that we had already specified an S3 bucket where this assessment report will be stored. It'll take some time to generate this report, so I'll go ahead and take a look at one of the existing reports just to show you what that looks like. When you download the assessment report, you get a compressed zip file. And that zip file has both the assessment report as well as the detailed evidence. So let's take a quick look what exists inside the assessment report. The first page is a summary page that provides the details of the assessment from which this report has been generated. Then you're able to see a list of controls which are included in the assessment report. And from this, you can dive into the evidence folders and the specific pieces of evidence which has been attached to the report. If you click on any of these PDF files, it takes you to the actual evidence. This evidence is similar to what we saw in the console, but it's presented in the PDF format. So you're able to see the demographic details around the evidence, including the source, the event name, the event time, and then you're able to see the attributes which were returned from this data collection. Going back to Audit Manager here, I want to show you how you can customize controls. So Audit Manager comes with a pre-existing library of controls which is generated from the pre-built frameworks that we have, like PCI and HIPAA and CIS, etc. These controls can either be customized based on your particular situation and your particular requirements, or you can create a custom control. Let's go ahead and customize an existing control to see what that looks like. Similar to other workflows, you have to provide some of the details of what you want to be included here. If you would like to amend the testing information based on the changes you're about to make to data sources, you can do that. Add any tags for this control. And then you can move to the step where you can configure the data sources. This is the existing data source configuration for this control. This control is collecting user activity from CloudTrail. This is the specific CloudTrail keyword that is being used. There are additional data sources. There is a second data source, which is another CloudTrail keyword, which is also around EC2 related user activity, and a third data source, which is similar. Let's go ahead and make some changes here. As you can see, you can change the data source to be manual. You can also add new data sources. I'll go ahead and add a data source. If I choose a manual data source, I can provide a description so that it's easy to understand what this data source is about. And then there will be opportunity to upload this manual evidence when the assessment is running. If I want to use an automated evidence collection data source, then I can choose from these four options. I can either collect data from user activity from CloudTrail, and I have a library of data points to choose from CloudTrail here. Or I can select compliance checks that can be fetched from Security Hub based on Security Hub definitions of controls. Or I can choose compliance checks from config using the library that's available within Audit Manager. Another alternative is to use API calls. If I use an API call, I'm able to select from the library of APIs available. And of course, we expect to keep expanding the data sources available and the API calls available to Audit Manager. But in case of an API, I can also go ahead and select a frequency, since the API call is being triggered by the Audit Manager rather than Audit Manager collecting data based on frequency on which it is being generated. And I can go ahead and move to create this customized control further. I can add any action plan or a remediation plan. And that summarizes the control I have created. I'll go ahead and now include this in my library. So this control has been added to my control library, and I can go ahead and use this in any of my custom frameworks that I can create. And then I will be able to launch assessments from that custom framework. So that's essentially the key features of Audit Manager I wanted to demonstrate today.
Thank you, Kajal. Now, in terms of getting started, here are some summary recommendations on using Audit Manager. These are derived from Deloitte Consulting's guidance and observations during a joint Audit Manager session in December 2020. 4 cloud audit challenges are called out. These challenges are then mapped to Audit Manager capabilities to address that specific challenge. The first cloud audit challenge is to demonstrate continuous compliance versus point in time. And here, Audit Manager enables evidence collection in near real time to address this particular challenge. The second challenge is to effectively collect and review evidence from multiple sources. Audit Manager provides a consolidated view of evidence from multiple sources as a single pane of glass. Third challenge is to provide assurance of integrity of evidence captured. Audit Manager provides both evidence integrity as well as traceability. And lastly, in terms of the assessment, the scope of the controls is linked to the type of service. Audit Manager provides for targeted assessments, scope for granularity at each specific service level. So in closing, Audit Manager is an exciting new service that helps you be much more productive and efficient by automating assessments and evidence collection. You can get started quickly via AWS Console. You can use one of the pre-built assessments, or you can customize your own, and you can start reviewing the collected evidence within 24 hours. To help you explore and test Audit Manager, there is a free trial subject to a limit that's available to you for the first 2 months. Do take advantage of this particular free trial. On a broader note, training has never been more important. You can keep learning beyond the summit with resources from AWS Training and Certification for Security. We offer more than 25 courses around security, identity, and compliance, and you can also pursue a specialty certification. Thank you for your interest and your time today. Please fill out the session survey. Thank you.